Now we want to go to a great guest we have for you guys, Juan Cole. He's a professor at the University of Michigan, one of the top experts in the Middle East in the country, and the author of the book, Engaging the Muslim World by Juan Cole. Professor Cole, welcome back to the Young Turks.
Thanks so much.
Really appreciate having you on. I know you wrote about Iran, of course, in the book and how the U.S. should engage them. It appeared that Obama was headed down that path, and then we had a bit of a sea change event in Iran. How do you think we should react to what I view to be an illegitimate Iranian government at this point?
Well, to tell you the truth, the last 8 years with the neoconservatives and so forth has pushed me to be a little bit more of a realist than I used to be. I wouldn't ordinarily cite Hank Kissinger, but he said that chess is a game you have to play with the pieces on the board, and that diplomacy is exactly the same way. And, on reflection, there's something to that, unless you're going to go around crusading against everybody all the time. Things are settling down in Iran. It appears that the protest movement is moving from the streets to other kinds of long-term political organizing. And in the meantime, the U.S. has a set of problems with Iran that can't be put off or ignored, and they're just going to have to deal with the government that's there.
Well, before we move on, I want to ask you what's happening on the ground in Iran. Are the secret police, etc., the Basij, going around arresting a lot of the leaders now, or are they kind of letting them be because they don't want to stoke up any more anger?
Well, whenever there are street protests, they will target the people who are they think are the ringleaders of the street protests. And so there will, every time there are protests, there are a few arrests. A lot of those people are held and released. Some of them are abused and kept. It's a bad situation. The human rights situation in Iran has been nothing to write home about for a very long time. So it's a mixed picture. A lot of people that were arrested earlier have been let go. On the other hand, there's been very serious allegations from serious people of torture. And then there are still a lot of people in jail, including, what I mind, among other things, is that there are bloggers in jail for blogging, and some of them may be being mistreated. But, the thing that I want to underline is that while the protests against what were done are new in their scale, and we hadn't seen anything like that since 1978, the system is not new. So I think the 2004 parliamentary elections were more or less stolen. The 2005 presidential election probably was tinkered with. From my point of view as somebody who says we have to engage that government, this is business as usual on the government side. What's changed is only that we've seen the face of very, very significant popular protest against the regime.
Yeah, I've said this on a number of occasions, and people told me, hey, Cenk, don't say that. You don't know about the 2005 elections. But it seemed fairly clear that they manipulated it so that Ahmadinejad would come in second and go ahead against Rafsanjani in the runoff. And I didn't believe for a second that he'd actually legitimately won that vote. Why did people actually believe that? And I don't know. Am I right about that?
Well, I think you're right about it. These things are murky. I would say that the evidence for tinkering with the 2004 parliamentary elections is even stronger. I mean, the liberals, the reformists, had been winning those elections. They won in 2000. In the parliament, they had won both 1997 and 2001, the presidency. And the hardliners, Janati and others, engineered a process whereby 3,500 candidates were just excluded from running because they didn't meet an ideological litmus test.
So, Professor Cole, I want to ask you, I mean, we understand that the government's been a fraud for a while in Iran. How much did the Iranian people understand that before this election?
Well, the Iranian people understood exactly what had been done to them, which was that the system had this small corner of partial democracy where people could vote for parliament, they could vote for the presidency, and they had, from 97 forward, started using that small corner of democracy to try to make a case for more individual liberties. And the hardliners saw what happened. They were very upset. They used their control of the more authoritarian clerical side of the government to close down the newspapers, close down the movement, and ultimately engineered a hardline takeover of Parliament just by not letting the reformists run. And then, as you said, I think they tinkered at the margins, at least with the 2005 presidential election, putting in Ahmadinejad as the hardline president. So there's been a kind of democratic movement towards change, which was then very brutally repressed. And so I think one of the questions people had was Ahmadinejad's victory in 2005 a sign of the bankruptcy of the regime, or was it that the reformists were so discouraged by what had been done that they didn't come out and vote? And so they tested this by coming out and voting in very large numbers, and then they saw that, yes, it was the bankruptcy of the regime.
Okay, so the question, of course, then comes back to what we started with, which is what do we do about it? And we're talking to Professor Juan Cole. He writes the blog Informed Comment, which is at juancole.com, and, of course, now the author of the book Engage the Muslim World. So, Professor Cole, here's the thing, right? I can't stand the neocons. I think they were incredibly foolish not to deal with Iran for the 8 years that Bush was in charge. In fact, we got a great deal from them after the Iraq War, and Cheney turned it down because he doesn't want to talk to evil. It was one of the dumbest things he's done, and that's a tough thing to say about Cheney because he's done so many dumb things. On the other hand, these guys are, at this point now, clearly a dictatorship. So we have two different goals here in my mind. One is, look, we have to engage them in order to have talks about their nuclear program, etc. On the other hand, I would love to undermine them. And the question is, how do we undermine them and get an actual democracy in Iran? And especially when we're trying to engage them at the same time.
Well, okay, so I think one of the strengths of the regime and one of the things that helps keep it authoritarian is its relative isolation from the rest of the world. It can thumb its nose at world opinion just because it's not connected with the world. In fact, the more sanctions you put on its institutions, its companies, its banks, and so forth, the less it's connected with the international community, and the more independence it has to treat its people horribly. So I actually think that negotiating with them, trying to draw them into the international community, does have an effect over time of undermining them. And I think we've seen this with other authoritarian regimes.
So we have to be patient, take the long way, and invite them into the community of nations so that, ironically, the culture and the money, etc., will seep in. And if there are enough people with enough money that are attached to the outside world, then we can begin to influence them in a direction of democracy.
Sure. And that's what happened. People forget now how horrible South Korea was for how long. It was a horrible military dictatorship. It's really relatively recently that it has joined the international community. But in the 80s, it wasn't cut off, and there were mechanisms that could be applied. If you've got companies operating in other countries and they come to you and say, well, look, we're going to put sanctions on you if you don't start behaving better and move away from this authoritarian regime, then you have an economic reason to want to make them happy. At the moment, Iran, it's a state that gets most of its income from petroleum sales. Its companies not buying up things in Spain or anything. So why would they care what we think of them?
Is that basically the same thing that happened in South Africa, that there were enough rich folks who were getting hurt by the sanctions that they said, all right, this is hurting the bottom line too much, we've got to change?
Well, I think it's controversial how effective those sanctions were on South Africa. But personally, I think there were enough people connected to the outside world that it did matter to them. It mattered what people thought of them.
Yeah.
So the other thing to say, though, is that, with regard to Iran, the United States has already undermined several governments there and made a lot of mess. I get nervous when I hear Americans talking about the need to intervene in Iran. And, we had a very ambiguous result in the 2000 election campaign. And imagine if France and Germany and the UK and Europe more generally came to us and said, look, we want to set up a commission to look into your presidential election. We want to examine whether it was on the up and up.
Well,
we might want you to make some changes.
But Professor Cole, you could make an argument that would have been a fantastic thing.
Well, it would have been a fantastic thing in some ways, that there would be international accountability. But I'm just trying to suggest that Americans are so used to going around the world intervening in other people's affairs that they don't stop to apply the golden rule to it. That we're the sole superpower, so we don't stop and think, well, what would it be like if other people were interfering in our affairs?
I hear you, and that's a great argument for the rest of America. For my purposes, I think our election should have international monitors. So, no, I really do, so that we can say to the rest of the world, look, even we do it. So everyone should.
I'm not talking about monitoring. I'm talking about strong arming.
Oh, well, okay. And then we can, quibble over definitions too. But okay, before we let you go, though, I got to ask you about Afghanistan real quick. Obama's sending in more troops. They're, going after the Taliban in the south, etc. Do you think that that's the right strategy right now, or do you think he should be doing something else?
Well, I think it's too early to tell what the strategy is. That is to say, the troops that are being sent in, as I understand it, are mainly being sent in to try and help make sure that the presidential elections occur on August 20th. And Obama is doing a review of what the war goals are in Afghanistan, how they can be achieved in a reasonable time frame, and so forth. We haven't seen that review, and we haven't heard from the president what his reaction is to it. So we're still a little bit in limbo with regard to Afghanistan policy. I think they want to move towards more civilian aid. General McChrystal is talking about doubling civilian aid workers in Afghanistan. They want to pour a lot of money into development, roads, and economic development, and those are all to the good. They're the kinds of things that Bush promised to do and didn't do. And then I think they want to train and grow the Afghan army as they did in Iraq, to the point where it can undertake the security mission.
I think it's tough, but I think it can work. But a lot of progressives don't think so. They think we're wasting our time and putting in too many troops, and it's the wrong way to go. Do you think it has a chance of working?
Well, they pulled it off in Iraq in some ways, in the end. And they've made a lot of mistakes along the way, of course. I think that I'd be very nervous about a strategy that just involved more, troops, more kinetic operations in the South. I think that would just alienate people. But what I hear them saying is that they're going to couple that with a lot of training and bumping up of the Afghan army, and also a lot of economic aid. And if they can make those three things work together, they might have a chance of getting out of this with their skin intact.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you completely on that, actually. All right, now the book is called Engaging the Muslim World. We're going to put that up at theyoungturks.com in our library section so people can get it from there. Professor Juan Cole, as always, great pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me.